Welcome back to the Your Golf Performance Podcast. We're joined with a legend in the putting instruction world, Mark Sweeney from Point Golf. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Look, we chatted briefly off air, and I think it's an amazing system that I want to learn more of over the next 12 months. But can you sort of just talk to our listeners about what is Point and how you come up with the concept?
Sure. I mean, Aimpoint started as a software program that predicted breaks. So it had to take any putt on any real golf green in the world, any green speed, any amount of wind, any grain, any player, any hole position, any amount of slope, and give you a correct predicted path of the putt and aim within 3 seconds. So the requirements I had for TV were you had to do this in 3 seconds, and so they could say they could name any golf course on PGA Tour and stick any pin in the ground and any length putt and say you have 3 seconds to find a solution, an accurate solution that then we're going to draw that line on live TV. And if you're wrong, you're going to look really stupid. so it was a pretty high, demand of accuracy, which got us to make the software as accurate as possible. So because it was live TV and there was no dubbing, there was no, this is on tape record, we can go back and put the correct line in afterwards. Yeah. There's no room for error at all. And so it had a requirement of the math had to be right. So the nice thing is that it forced us to get the math right under any conditions. And then that evolved into how do I use that as a player with no computer, no laser scans of the greens, no inputs, just I walk out there as a player. I've got 40 seconds to read my putt and hit it. Can I use those concepts to do that? And that to come to the Express method probably took, 7 years from that point before Express came around. But Express has been around 10 years now. This week is our 10-year anniversary of when we invented Express. So, so there were some evolutions in between there, but Express is the current version and the most widely used and the most accurate, I think.
So how did you come up with, when obviously TV said, you've got 3 seconds to be able to predict this, slope or break on the putt? How long did that system take you to develop?
The software, believe it or not, I had running and a patent filed within about 2 months. And then the problem was, it took another 3 years before the Golf Channel used it. And then we went out to Kapalua and I didn't have any function in for wind. And, and Kapalua can blow. And so you're up there on top of a volcano, basically, and it was blowing 30 miles an hour and I didn't have a wind function in, which if you watch the broadcast, you actually don't really see a problem. But, we only showed, 4 or 5 lines a day out of hundreds of putts we simulated. But I realized very quickly we need to be able to model wind to be correct on that. And then we got the wind in there within a couple weeks. And then I really haven't touched it since then. And so I really haven't touched the software since mid 2007, because when it works, it works. And one thing about software programming is when something works, don't touch it.
Yeah, it's not broken.
Leave it alone. The minute you touch it, you introduce bugs. And so I literally haven't touched it in, 15 years.
So I have a lot of parents that are new to golf, a lot of junior golfers, a lot of coaches that listen to this podcast. Do you want to just give a run through there's going to be some listeners to this podcast that don't watch the TV coverage or whatnot. Their kids go to junior golf, but they're not really seeing people use Aimpoint. Do you want to just give us a quick run through on who some of your top users are of the system?
Yeah, I mean, Aimpoint is the most used green reading system in the world on all tours. Half of the top 20 money list players, both LPGA and PGA Tour, use Aimpoint. So if I just go down the finals of the FedEx Cup, I'll tell you the players who used it in the final round. Victor Hovland, Tommy Fleetwood, Scotty Scheffler, Colin Morikawa, Sam Burns, Max Homa, Keegan Bradley, Ricky Fowler, Tom Kim, and Corey Connors. So there's, I don't know, that's half the field right there. And so generally, if you watch PGA Tour, usually half of the top 10 use Aimpoint every week. And I think Aimpoint users or caddies have won half of all tournaments in the last 18 months. So for instance, last week we had the PGA Tour and European Tour winner. And the week before we had PGA Tour, European Tour, and LPGA. So we've had 5 pro wins in 2 weeks, just so people using Aimpoint. So it's out there a lot more than you think. And it's out there because it works and people who do it right get great success with it.
Definitely seeing more and more of it as the years go on. We chatted off air about the change to the whole, I guess,
Yeah.
golf industry that it brought in, and some apprehension from people. Um, how would, if someone wanted to start using it, obviously they need to get coached by an accredited aim point coach, but can we talk a little bit through what they would learn going through learning your system?
Yeah, so you'd start off just learning the basic concepts for 5 minutes, which is just what information do you need to read a putt correctly. So if I ask 100 players what information you need, they usually give you an okay answer, but you get a lot of kind of quizzical looks, and they don't really give you a full answer. They say, well, you're looking for slope and uphill, downhill, and then they kind of run out of steam at that point, right? So we give a very clear answer of, well, this is the information you need. And then if you understand that, then you understand the endpoint process, which is, how do I get that information? I need to know how much side slope. Normally you would have to know the length of the putt, but with aim point, we don't have to know the length of the putt, because the fingers, when you hold up fingers, it creates a launch angle off your eyes, and that automatically scales for the length of the putt. So really with aim point, all you really need to know is slope and relative speed. So some idea of green speed and uphill, downhill. If you do that, you're pretty much done.
And then would this be something that you implement into students' practice regimes, learning to feel the slope of the green and that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So once we do concepts, we'd go into feeling what 1, 2, 3, 4 slopes feel like, which is easy. Everybody gets that right. People always worry that the hard part with aim point is feeling slopes, and that's actually the easiest part. The hard part is people don't understand the correct process. So what's happening is they're feeling the right slope in the wrong place.
Yeah, right.
Right. So they're getting a number, which is the right number for where they're standing, but that's not the right number for the putt. And so there's a process, a very specific aim point process that if you do correctly is bulletproof. But a lot of people kind of put their own spin on it and put their own little process, and, well, maybe I'll feel it here or feel it there. And the minute they do that, they introduce errors in the green read. So you're really just learning to feel slope in the right place, and then use the fingers automatically convert that to a mathematically correct aim.
Okay. It's funny. One of our listeners, PGA coach Gavin Sutherland, listens to all the episodes, and I was actually messaging him and, trying to see if he had some questions to ask you. And then I sort of threw out I wonder what happens if someone can't feel. And he said everyone should be able to feel the slope. He goes, there's something wrong if they're doing something wrong if they can't feel it. What about grain on greens? Now, I actually noticed this week you posted some stuff on social media about it after I'd already written the question, but do you want to just go?
Yeah, it was funny. I posted that. That's actually like a 12, 15-year-old video that we just kind of repurposed.
Yeah.
So grain is a potential adjustment to the read. So it's like wind. Slope causes break. The length of the putt, the speed, influence how much it breaks. Well, grain can influence how much it breaks. So in some situations, it'll increase the effective speed of the putt. So down grain or up grain will change the effective stimp. So your effective speeds are different whether you're into the grain or down grain. When it's more of a problem, which really confuses people, is when you have cross grain, meaning slopes going left, grains going right. And when that happens, it reduces your number. So whatever your number is, you have to take something off. It's a minus amount because it actually holds the putt up and the putt won't break enough. Similarly, if you have a straight putt with no side slope with cross grain, you get break. So you've got to throw a number in for the grain adjustment. It's like adjusting for elevation. It's 150 yards and it's 10 yards uphill. What's the real number? Well, grain's similar. It should break like a 2, but the grain's going the wrong direction, so it breaks like a 1.5.
So, do you have a preference for speeds, like optimal? Is there an optimal holding speed? Like, would some people are like fast and then they're slamming it and taking out break. Like, what do you have any recommendations for that?
Yes, for me, it's more of a range. And so the ideal range for me would be 6 inches to 18 inches past the hole. On fast greens, they get up to 2 feet past, like PGA Tour averages, I think about 2 feet past the hole. Greens are faster. The reason you don't want to slam it in for a couple of reasons. Number one, the harder you hit it, the smaller the hole gets, and you'll get lots of lip outs. So even at 2 feet past, you start getting a lot of lip outs. Second reason is you never want to introduce a three putt because you hit it so hard, which we see a
Yeah.
lot of juniors and college players doing. And then the third, there's kind of an optimal range based on how long the putt is. So if you're anywhere inside 20 feet, at least 6 inches past, A, because you don't want to leave too many short. B, you want to take the grain effect out. So, balls on grain, the last revolution can shave really hard down grain. Well, that's about 6 inches long, and you want that behind the hole, not in front of the hole. So, if you put on Bermuda and you hit it dead weight, the ball gets right up to the front edge and then just shaves off to the side and misses. So we want to get rid of that effect on Bermuda grass for sure. So it's really anything kind of 6 inches to, let's say, 2 feet by. Um, that the is I always say a range, not an optimal distance, because depending on what the green speed, whether it's uphill or downhill, the actual speed the ball hits the hole can change. So if you have a fast downhill putt, it can go 2.5 feet past the hole, but be going really slow when it gets to the hole.
Yeah.
Right. So again, we don't want a three putt and we don't want lip outs. And so it's a range. It's a range for me.
And accuracy, as far as like when people have done the system and the reading, like do you have like practice drills that they might do that sort of is learning to narrow in their misses?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with feeling slope, there's ways to improve your accuracy. You can use a level to get better at your slope. I don't use a level very much at all, but you'll see lots of people out there just feeling the slope, putting the level down and checking their number, and that's fine. But the ball tells you the number. So every time you pick a number and hit the ball, it tells you whether you are right or not. So if you think it's a 2 and it breaks under the hole, it was not a 2. It was a 2.5 or a 3. So I can watch the ball and tell you what the correct number is. And then if I get it wrong, which happens, sometimes you just get the wrong number. I would go back and feel it again and say, okay, that is a 3 feeling, not a 2.5 feeling. So you're
So
kind of
you're
always
calibrating.
self-correcting. Yeah, you're kind of closing the loop there, the feedback loop, and self-correcting as you're playing. And by doing that, I really don't need to practice a whole lot, frankly. So I'm kind of always self-correcting.
Yeah, right. Um, you've made mention of Express. Do you want to just explain to the listeners? Obviously, there was a longer process to begin with, and a lot more people have trended towards the Express. Can you explain the differences, or if there
Yeah,
is?
the version before Express was the aim chart read. It was called the midpoint read. And so what you would do is you would figure out the break based on how much slope there was, how long the putt is, and the putt's angle to the slope. So you basically figure out where the fall line is. And then if you had a 30-degree uphill putt from 10 feet, this chart would tell you it breaks 6 inches. So you kind of figure out where you are around the hole. And it was very accurate because it automatically adjusted for uphill, downhill. But you had to get 3 inputs right. You had to get the distance, the slope, and the angle. And if you got all 3 of those right, the read was dead on accurate. But then you also would end up with a number like it's 41 inches right. And the question is, well, where's 41 inches? Right. And so it was a necessary process to go through because that read actually validated the express read. So when we first started throwing fingers up, the aim chart would tell you 10 feet across a 2% slope will break 9 inches. And you go stand at 10 feet and you hold up 2 fingers, and guess what it shows you? 9 inches outside the hole. Right. So the chart is what we always use to validate the correctness of the express read, and maybe even uphill, downhill. Okay, downhill is going to break a little more. How much more? We'd use the chart as kind of the Rosetta Stone for what the putt should be doing.
This could be a very silly question, but holding the fingers up, would someone have to figure out, like if someone's got super skinny fingers and someone's got bigger fingers, does that affect, or is it all relative to how they're reading it?
No, the number's a number. So like a two is a 2% slope. It's a measured amount of slope, just like a
Yeah.
yardage would be.
Yeah.
There are little differences in finger size and arm width. So the reality is almost everybody of every age, if they hold their arm straight out in front of them and hold up one finger, that creates a 2-degree launch angle, give or take 0.2. So really small finger would be 1.8 degrees. A really big finger would say be 2.2 degrees. Well, you can adjust for those differences by how much arm bend you have. So if somebody has a lot of arm bend, they can bend. I mean, if they have really small fingers, they would bend their arm a little bit more. If they had really big fingers, they might use the fingertips versus the second knuckle because your fingers get wider as they go down. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can adjust for little anatomical differences with players. And I've been teaching Express 10 years now, and I think maybe one time in Australia, I had a guy who had just massive hands. I think he was a boxer or something. He just had absolutely massive hands, and that created a little bit of a problem. But that was one out of. I've taught tens of thousands of people. That was the only time I was like, "Man, we got to think of some way to get him seeing less less break because his hands were just so big."
Now we got the video on, and you probably can see me right now fiddling around here, throwing my arms
Yeah.
out. Is there a both eyes open? Do we close one? Is there any preferences to that?
Usually close one eye. I usually don't care unless you're seeing something weird, but it's usually standard is close one eye. I've seen some issues where somebody's cross dominant, where they're right-handed but left eye dominant, and sometimes when they hold their fingers up, they don't see what they're supposed to see. So I usually say hand behind your dominant eye if there's any question at all. So left eye dominant people, we tend to go left-handed on, and
Yeah.
that solves if there's an issue at all, that solves it.
All right, it's very interesting. We just chatted off air. You want to try to come out here in early January, so I'm
I'd
gonna
like to, yeah.
speak to the PGA and try to get as many people as we can to come and learn this. Because, as I said to you, like I've got a junior program that I've coached for 15 years now, and it is so hard to teach someone how to read greens. And then your answer was you can't without a
Yeah,
system.
that
You
is my answer.
yeah, it's and like going back 30 years when I was a junior golfer, like we basically just dug it out of the dirt, right? We had to figure out, okay, it feels like this, or I think it's going to do this. That was the only way. Now this has come along, and it's sort of, it's bridging the gap, I think, for so many golfers, and that's why was so keen to get you on and try to learn a little bit, and then also, see if we can get you out here next year. So, um,
Well, the Express Read was designed for juniors. It was designed for 7 and 8 year olds
yeah,
because when you have little to no experience in golf, there is no way to teach good green reading,
yeah,
right? Well, I mean, when they're what do new golfers do? They aim straight at the hole and hit it, and it breaks. And they hit straight at the hole, and it breaks, and eventually it goes in. Well,
like
you've got
that.
to. We started off just saying we just need to get them aiming on the high side of the hole somewhere,
Yeah,
right? So we're putting our thumb on the high side of the hole, which just got them saying right side's high, aim out there somewhere. Then we figured out that it actually matches the math really, really well. And I get this question sometimes: how do you teach green reading without aim point? And I said, I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know because if you want to be a good green reader and a consistently good putter, um, there are so much variation in break based on slope and length of putt and speed. You just cannot memorize it all. You can't. You can be streaky good, but I mean, I've taught Champions Tour players. I've taught Nick Faldo came out for an aim point lesson with 5 putters. He says, I can't see anything. I have no idea what's going on in the green.
yeah, right.
Right. And so it almost doesn't matter how long you've been playing golf. If you don't have a system to do it, the best you'll be usually is streaky.
I was just going to say, and that's why people will feel like they can see the line and just hit it in hole putts for a month on end, and then all of a sudden they lose it. And the amount of times, if I had $1 for every time someone come in and said, you know what, I just burnt the edge all day today.
Yeah.
But if they
Yeah.
had
And
a
the thing
system like
is,
yours, it fixes it.
well, and if you don't have a system, everything's great, it's great. But the minute you're not making putts, you don't know why. And now you're screwed.
Yeah.
Okay. I used to make a ton of putts. Now I'm not. Why? Don't know. Right. And the player will not know the answer. And then he'll start, fiddling with his putter and his grip and all that. It's like, no, your eyes change over time. You might have been reading it based on a slightly, closed aim or a hook stroke or something, and suddenly that went away, and now your reads are all off because they were kind of compensating for your stroke or your setup changed or like whatever, but they can't back into the solution. And where with aim point you say, oh, I got my number wrong. That's it.
Yeah.
Got my number wrong. Or my process was off and my number was wrong. Not a problem. It's like getting a yardage. Well, I got the wrong yardage. Okay, well, you didn't shoot the flag. You shot the tree behind the green.
Yeah. And
You
you
just
know
got
what?
no, you just got the wrong number.
That could solve a lot of problems with those people that get so upset about it. Like, it's got to be their putting stroke. Oh man, I can't. if all of a sudden they can narrow it down and go, you know what, I felt the slope wrong, or
Yeah,
misread the slope, or whatever the degrees percent.
yeah. And everybody blames their stroke first, and it's
Yeah,
usually not the stroke. And the better the player is, with good tour level players, their stroke is maybe 10% of the problem.
yeah,
Maybe 10% of misses are stroke. It's read and speed. And once their read
yeah,
is good, it's almost all speed.
yeah. So I don't know how much you get into the technical side of things. Like, obviously, it's green reading. It's not stroke related, this, that, and the other. But have you had much to do? You seem like a smart dude with Putt Lab or Capto data to sort of to see if there is certain characteristics of strokes that make people read greens certain ways.
What I can tell you, I do work mechanics. I have worked with all that. I that's the last thing I do. So my putting instruction would be green reading first, get a good target. Then you can fix your setup and your aim, and then it's start line and speed, right? And I've seen a lot of very, very different strokes result in really, really, really good putting. So as far as tendencies, I mean, I'd say the only one that I see that really doesn't seem to work well is kind of short jabby strokes. All the really good putters that I've worked with had very smooth tempos. They're not accelerating hard. That being said, there's always an exception to the rule. But generally speaking, they tend to be much more smoother in terms of acceleration. They tend to have good face control. It's nobody has perfect face control, but they have a consistent face control. So if they're consistently half a degree shut, that's fine as long as they start their line. So for me, it's are you hitting your line or not? And if you can't hit your line, okay, now we need to look at your setup of your mechanics, because if you can't hit your line, then you're going to have good reads, but you're still not going to make enough putts.
Putts, yeah.
But there's I've worked with lots of great putters who didn't aim great, but they hit their line, and then you just
Yeah,
leave them
right.
alone. As long as you roll your line,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to leave it.
It's like your comment before about your system. I don't want to touch it because that'll start to bring some bugs in.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know how much, if you've done a whole lot of putting mechanics instruction, but by the time somebody's a fairly well-developed player, it is not easy to change their tendencies.
Yeah.
It is not easy. And it could take a long time. And the minute they get under pressure, they just go right back to what they
Revert
did.
straight back to what's comfortable. Right?
Instantly, they go back for comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. One of the questions from a pretty good putting coach down here in Australia, Mark Officer, he said,
I know a Mark Officer.
there you go. Well, Mark texted me last night. Well, I texted him, and then he texted me back, and he said, when you got a combination slope, so downhill and left to right versus uphill right to left of the same length, will the downhill break more, or will both putts have the same aim when they have the same side slope amount?
No, they break different, obviously, because downhill breaks more than uphill because the ball's rolling for longer. And that's what a lot
Okay.
of people don't get, right?
Yeah.
Anything that increases the length of the roll, which would be downhill, increased green speed, length of putt, increases the total break. So the way you handle it with aim point is, let's say it's a downhill two versus an uphill two. A two is a two, but anything with speed is managed with arm bend. So when you have a downhill putt, you'd bend your arm slightly more, and that increases the break because it's a faster, effective stimp. And so
Yeah.
stimp is managed with arm bend, which also would be uphill, downhill adjustments, and to some degree grain, because a downhill grain would have a much faster, effective stimp than an uphill grain.
All right. So I'm just going to pick your brain here, and I'm not trying to get a free aim point session.
No, go for it.
So when you're talking about stimp, let's say my arm is dead straight. What, like, our greens at the club that I'm at are 10 and a half, 11 most days. Like,
Yeah. So
what?
dead straight would be roughly 8.
Yeah. Okay. All
Right.
right.
So if you look at all the guys on tour, they've got roughly a 45-degree bend. That's about 11-ish.
Yeah.
They
Right.
get to Masters, they have a 90-degree bend. That's faster than 11.
It's amazing. I didn't know this, and it's
Yeah.
cool to be able to hear it
Well,
from.
what a lot of people don't understand is the break at stimp 8. Well, if you take the exact same putt on a stimp 8 versus a stimp 12, the break is double at stimp 12 than 8. So
Yeah.
if it
Right.
breaks 12 inches on an 8, it breaks 24 inches on a stimp 12. So you wonder why, amateurs, I keep talking about how variable putting is. Well, if you're an amateur and you go from a 9 to a 10 to a 12 and a half to an 11, you can see the exact same slope and same length. They all break different, and sometimes dramatically different because the speeds are so different. So with aim point, you're just saying, what's the number? And then your arm bend will automatically adjust for the faster or slower stimps.
It's amazing. I actually can't wait to train up on this.
It's scary how once you get it, if you learn it correctly and start hitting putts, it'll freak you out how well it works.
Yeah,
like it'll honestly blow your mind.
Yeah. How do you get buy-in from the top level players? So obviously, early days there would have been some skeptics out there or whatnot, but is it now just
yeah, that's another statement.
But is it now? Well, actually, you know what? Before we go on to how you get the buy-in, how did you deal with the critics mentally?
It was hard because I tend to have a very thin skin. It's much thicker now than it was 15 years ago. But I took a lot of very aggressive criticism in the beginning of Aim Point, going all the way back to 2007 or 8. Scott McCarron started using it, and some guys were using Aim Point back then. Stacey Lewis, Lydia Ko were using original chart Aim Point. I got some really nasty attacks coming from all over the industry, from players, caddies, announcers. But I knew the system worked because if you know my personality, I would never in my life publicly put something out there that didn't work. There's no chance. And so anything you've seen that I've put out there, I've tested for at least 6 months and tried to shoot holes in and figure out how to break it before I'm showing it to anybody. So after that, it was just kind of a slow, the LPGA started first with Stacey Lewis and Lydia Ko started Aim Point immediately and went to Express very quickly and won 14 times using, Express, went to number 1 in the world, number 1 in all putting categories. As far as the men, Brian Gay was the first person, and then Adam Scott, and then Justin Rose, and then they all improved, and then slowly over time, more and more and more guys started doing it. And the thing is, like, once you get somebody who's like a spectacular ball striker like Hovland, before Hovland started using Express, we actually looked at his ball striking stats and said if he learned how to putt, he'd be number 1 in the world because his ball striking at the time was insanely good. But he was playing well, but he wasn't performing like he should. Then he learned Express and just started winning. You know what I mean? And then you know how tour works. If somebody goes out and wins that much money using a system, it's going to get a lot of attention from a lot of people.
Everyone wants to jump on board. Yeah.
And somebody said this last week or the week before. There was a new tour player started using it, and the coach said, "What made you start using Aim Point?" And he said, "Because he goes, everybody who uses it gets better." He goes, "Bad putters who use it are no longer bad putters." So historically, you get a lot of guys ranked below 125 in putting. Like Keegan Bradley, right? Keegan Bradley started, he was ranked 130, 140, and he's top 20. Fleetwood's top 20. A bunch of these guys, Hovland, a bunch of these guys who are not known as good putters suddenly are top 20 putters. And that will get people's attention.
Geez, it must make you feel good to have come up with a system like this, and now it's used worldwide by thousands and thousands.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me this 10 years ago when we were just screwing around with it, I would have laughed in your face. I would have been thrilled with one tour player using it. And now it's literally, if somebody doesn't win using it, it's kind of a surprise to me. Like any given week, I'm always surprised if the winner isn't using Aim Point.
It's absolutely amazing. So look, here's your last little pitch here, right? We're just about finished. Why should someone choose Aim Point over other methods? Is it because there is no other methods?
Well, I would normally say there is no other method. And I mean, there's technically a few other methods out there, but they don't work, right? And when I say they don't work is they don't work consistently. So I've tested other methods. There's a few methods out there now that are knockoffs from Aim Point from 15 years ago. Literally stuff we were doing 15 years ago. There's a couple guys doing independently now. The reason it was Aim Point 15 years ago is because it was either too hard or broke down in certain situations. And that's why we literally I've abandoned probably 3 other Aim Point read methods in favor of Express. Just threw them out. Just like a lot of people did it. A lot of people won with it, but Express is better. We kept evolving to Express. And so there's other chart methods out there right now which was, again, the original Aim Point was a chart. Charts are illegal on tour, so you can't carry a chart with you. But the issue with a chart that I saw players using is they always underperformed from kind of 4 to 10 feet. And the reason they underperform in that insanely critical range is because the break is growing very fast from 4 to 10 feet. So every foot you go back, if you don't play a different break, you miss the hole. Doesn't kind of go in. You actually will miss the hole. It'll miss the if you play the 4 foot break at 5 feet, you will miss the hole completely. So it's very sensitive to how long the putt is. And if you're doing a chart and you think you're at 6 feet, but you're really at 7 feet, you miss. And with aim point, you're holding up fingers, and it doesn't matter whether you're 6.25 feet or 7.7 feet. It's automatically scaling because you're working on launch angles.
Yeah.
So it takes all that margin of error away.
Mark, this has been absolutely amazing. My brain just feels overloaded right now. I can't wait. Hopefully we can. I'm going to try and make a couple calls today, and hopefully we can get you out to Australia early
That'd be
January,
great.
and I will be there. For the listeners that want to know more about you, what's your website and how can they find you on social media?
Yeah, aimpointgolf.com is the website. You can go out there and find instructors. There's about 300 around the world. And social media, Instagram is Aimpoint Golf, and Twitter is Aimpoint Golf, although I don't really use it much. More Instagram than anything else at the moment. But Aimpoint Golf will get me kind of anywhere.
All right. We thank you so much for taking the time, and we might get you on again in the future once I've done some training and put some
There you
juniors
go.
and ask some more questions. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks.